I had been dreaming about this cabin for years. Not some sprawling mansion with endless HOA rules and nosy neighbors, but a small lakeside place where the only alarm clock would be birds, and the only deadlines would be catching dinner before sunset. After months of searching, negotiating, and signing what felt like 1,000 pieces of paperwork, I finally had it. The cabin was mine, every plank, every corner, every inch of that property. I could almost feel the peace wrapping around me like a warm blanket. The first morning I arrived, I parked my truck, stepped onto the gravel driveway, and breathed in that crisp lake air. The sun was just peeking over the tree line, sparkling on the water in a way that made you forget city life even existed. I unlocked the cabin door, pushed it open, and for a brief, magical moment I was alone. Finally. Free. Then came the sound that shattered that perfect bubble, tires crunching on gravel, too close for comfort. I squinted through the morning haze and saw a patrol truck barreling toward me, like some kind of suburban SWAT team with clipboards instead of rifles. My stomach dropped. Two men jumped out, uniforms, badges, stern expressions. One of them held a clipboard as if it were a weapon. The other had his hands on his hips, looking like he had personally arrested everyone who ever built a dock without permission. I waved, hopping for a casual hello scenario. That hope died instantly. "You're trespassing," the first guard said, voice clipped. "This property is under HOA supervision." I laughed. I thought it was a joke. "I think you mean my property," I replied, gesturing at the cabin behind me. "I bought this last week. It's mine." The guards didn't even blink. They didn't care about deeds or papers or the fact that I could show them every official document proving I was the legal owner. Instead, they started taking pictures of my truck, my porch, my boots. Every move I made seemed to justify their intrusion. "Sir," the second guard said, tapping his radio, "requesting authorization to remove subject." I froze. Did they just say remove me from my own land? I blinked, hoping I misheard. No, they definitely radioed for backup. I took a step toward them, trying to appear calm. "Gentlemen, this is my property. You cannot." "You're on HOA land," the first guard interrupted, cutting me off mid-sentence. "You have no right to be here." I stared at him, trying not to laugh. "This isn't HOA land. That's my cabin, my driveway, my lake view, and—" "You can't argue with the rules," the second guard said, as if laws didn't exist outside their badge. "Compliance is mandatory." My pulse started to spike. My peaceful retreat had turned into a tense standoff in less than 5 minutes. And to think, all I wanted was to sit on my porch with a cup of coffee and forget the world. Now I was in a full-blown HOA hostage situation, and the backup they called could be here any second. I stepped back inside the cabin to buy some time. The door was only slightly locked, more of a polite suggestion than security, but it was enough for now. I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through HOA bylaws and property maps, hoping to find some loophole that would let me breathe again. My hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from that sudden adrenaline rush when you realize someone thinks your home doesn't belong to you. Then I heard it, the low rumble of another vehicle approaching down the gravel road. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance. I froze again. My peaceful morning, my dream of escaping the city and the chaos, had officially turned into a nightmare. And that's when I realized something truly terrifying. I was about to find out just how far an HOA would go to protect their land, even when it wasn't theirs. I thought the nightmare ended when the first 2 guards left after that tense standoff. I thought maybe I'd get to enjoy my cabin, sip my coffee, and just breathe. But apparently hope was in short supply in my life that week. The next morning, before the sun even had a chance to warm the lake, I woke to a sound that made my heart skip a beat. Metal clanking, heavy steps, and the unmistakable hum of determination from people who had clearly decided my home belonged to them. I threw open the blinds and froze. 2 guards were standing at the end of my driveway, this time with bolt cutters in hand. My gate, the one I had locked the night before, was already halfway open. They looked like they were about to storm a fortress. I rushed outside, trying to maintain some authority in a situation that had already spiraled out of control. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded. "We're protecting community assets from unauthorized occupants," said the first guard, like I should be thanking him for the intrusion. "I'm the owner," I shouted. "This is my property, my cabin, my land." "Property lines are under review," the second guard said, shrugging as if that explained breaking into my home. "Compliance is mandatory." I stared at him, mouth open. My coffee dreams were officially drowned in HOA madness. I stepped closer to the gate, gesturing wildly. "Under review? Are you serious? Do you even understand what the word property means?" They ignored me. One started cutting the chain like he was opening a treasure chest. The other slowly approached the cabin, scanning everything in sight. I felt like I was living inside a bad movie, and I had accidentally been cast as the trespasser in my own life story. I ran to block the guard approaching my front door. "Stop! You do not have the right to enter my house." He stopped just for a second, his eyes narrowing. "We have orders. You're on HOA land. You must comply." "I'm not on HOA land. I bought this property fair and square," I shouted, my voice cracking slightly under the tension. By now, I was packing in front of my cabin, trying to think 3 steps ahead. I grabbed my phone and started calling the sheriff, explaining the situation as quickly and calmly as possible, which, let's be honest, is nearly impossible when 2 men are literally cutting a chain to enter your home. "Sir," the guard said, noticing my phone, "what are you doing?" "I'm calling law enforcement. You are breaking and entering," I yelled. He smirked like that was the expected reaction. "The sheriff works with us, you'll see." At that moment, the adrenaline hit me full force. My hands were shaking, my chest tight, and I realized my cozy cabin dream had been replaced by a high-stakes standoff with people who apparently believed clipboards and bolt cutters gave them authority over reality. I backed toward my porch, trying to create some barrier between me and the intruders. The first guard was already halfway up the steps, ignoring my protests. The second one had started photographing my front windows and my porch furniture, like he was cataloging evidence against someone who hadn't done anything wrong. I gritted my teeth and tried reasoning with them. "Look, I can show you the deed, the survey, the paperwork, everything. You have no right here." "Documentation is irrelevant until reviewed," the first guard replied, eyes cold. My mind raced. How could anyone think this was acceptable? How had my dream cabin turned into a scene out of a crime thriller? I considered yelling for the neighbors, but there was no one around for miles. I realized this was my fight, and my fight alone. And then I heard it, the faint sound of sirens growing louder with every second. My heart jumped. Hope, the sheriff was finally coming. The guards stiffened at the sound. One of them muttered under his breath, but it was clear even they knew things were about to get messy. I stood tall, phone in hand, ready to show the authorities that this wasn't a community issue, but a blatant invasion of private property. But even as the first blue and red lights reflected off the lake, I knew this battle was only beginning. The cabin I had dreamed of for years was now a front line in a war I never asked for, and the HOA had already proven they were willing to cross every boundary, legal or moral, to assert control. And just like that, my peaceful morning had vanished. The stakes were higher, the tension thicker, and the real fight for my property had only just begun. By the time the sheriff arrived, my nerves were shredded, and my coffee had long gone cold. The guards straightened immediately, puffed their chests, and started their rehearsed speech, as if this was a performance they had practiced hundreds of times. "Sir," the first guard began, pointing at me like I had trespassed into a foreign country, "this man is illegally occupying property under HOA supervision. We request immediate enforcement." The second guard jumped in. "Unauthorized access, repeated trespassing, property violations pending review. Compliance is mandatory." The sheriff raised an eyebrow and looked at me. I could tell he was already leaning toward believing the guard's story. And honestly, why wouldn't he? 2 men in uniform, confident and insistent, versus one slightly panicked guy waving paperwork like it was a magic wand. I swallowed hard and said, "I'm the legal owner of this property. Here's my deed." I handed him the thick official document, the kind that makes lawyers nod and people stop arguing. The sheriff's eyes narrowed as he flipped through it. Silence fell. For a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, he was on my side. Then he looked up at the guards and the first crack in their armor showed. "This doesn't look like HOA land," he said slowly, almost to himself. "Where exactly is the boundary?" The guards exchanged uneasy glances. One muttered something about the lake. "The lake behind the cabin falls under HOA supervision," he said, voice a little too loud. The sheriff's eyebrows shot up. "So let me get this straight. You're claiming ownership of the water, therefore control of the land leading to it." "Yes," the guard said confidently. "The HOA is responsible for community access, so technically." "Technically?" the sheriff interrupted, voice sharp. "The technicals stop when you're breaking the law. You're standing on private property without permission. And you're telling me that because a lake is nearby, you can enter someone's home." I felt a flicker of hope. Finally, someone with authority was starting to make sense. The first guard's face went red. "Sir, you don't understand. This is standard procedure." "Standard procedure doesn't mean legal," the sheriff shot back. He turned to me. "Do you have any other documentation, surveys, permits, anything that proves the boundaries?" I handed over the survey from the county, showing clearly that my cabin sat fully outside the HOA territory. He studied it carefully, his jaw tightening as he compared it to the guard's claims. "Looks like your property lines are correct," he finally said. "This HOA has no jurisdiction here." The guards sputtered, trying to salvage credibility, but it was hopeless. They had nothing left. Then the sheriff looked at me, his tone softening slightly. "I need you to remain calm. I'm going to give them a warning, but if they step onto your property again, it will be considered criminal trespass." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, but relief was short-lived. One guard, clearly desperate, muttered something about community enforcement and refused to step back. The sheriff's hand went to his belt. I said, "Step back, now." The second guard raised his hands, retreating. The first one hesitated, eyes darting between me and the sheriff. Then slowly he backed down. Just when I thought it was over, my phone buzzed. A message from the HOA president popped up. "This is far from over. We will see you at the next board meeting." I groaned. Even when the law was on my side, the fight wasn't finished. The HOA wasn't giving up without a war. I looked at my cabin, the place that was supposed to be my escape, my sanctuary. Now it felt like a battlefield. I realized then that owning property wasn't just about signing papers. Sometimes it meant standing up against people who thought rules didn't apply to them. The sheriff turned to me one last time. "Keep all documents handy, and maybe start documenting every interaction. I don't like the look of these people. They play fast and loose with the law." I nodded, my mind raced. The battle lines were drawn. I knew the HOA would escalate. I didn't know how far they'd go, but one thing was certain, this fight for my cabin and my sanity was only beginning. And just as I locked the door behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of tires crunching gravel again. I looked through the window. My stomach sank. Another HOA vehicle was approaching. The suspense was far from over, and I had a feeling the next encounter wouldn't just test my patience. It would test my nerves, my wits, and my ability to protect the land I had fought so hard to buy. I thought dealing with two overconfident guards was bad. I thought the sheriff's arrival had finally restored some order. I was wrong. About 10 minutes after the last HOA vehicle drove off, a pristine white SUV rolled down my gravel driveway, engine purring like it on the lake. The tires stopped, and out stepped the HOA president herself. You know the type. Sunglasses too large for practicality, heels too high for comfort, and an aura of absolute authority that made even the guards look like apprentices. "Mr. Johnson," she called, clipboard in hand, voice sharp enough to cut wood. "Yes," I said cautiously, trying not to sound intimidated. "That's me." "I'm here on behalf of the HOA," she said, arms crossed, stance rigid. "You are standing on an HOA access road that was accidentally left unmarked during the last boundary survey, and that lake behind your cabin, technically community property." I blinked. "Wait, what?" She pointed dramatically toward the lake. This lake falls under HOA jurisdiction, which means your cabin is in violation of community regulations. You're trespassing, and fines will be applied retroactively for every day you've been here. I tried to speak, but all I could think was, this woman has officially lost her mind. This is my property. The deed is in my name, I shouted, waving the papers like a white flag of reason. She smirked. Ownership is irrelevant until the HOA validates your paperwork. Until then, compliance is mandatory. I laughed nervously at first, then louder. Mandatory? Are you serious? You think showing up with a clipboard and 2 guards gives you the right to invade my home? Mr. Johnson, she said, ignoring my protests. You don't understand the law. Section 42, subsection 7.3 of the HOA Charter allows. I held up my hand. Do you even know where my property actually begins? Because I have the survey, the county deed, and the original boundaries, all of which say this land is mine. She waved them off like I was a child throwing a tantrum. Excuses are irrelevant. Fines will be applied. Legal action may follow, and you will vacate immediately if ordered. I felt my pulse quicken. This was escalating faster than I could think. My sanctuary was turning into a courtroom, and I didn't even have a gavel. Excuse me, I said, voice shaking slightly but determined, but you cannot just show up, claim my land, and threaten me with fines. That's standard HOA procedure, she interrupted, tapping her perfectly manicured nail against her clipboard. We uphold community standards, and right now you are violating them. I realized then that this woman was not here for conversation. She was here for domination. To her, logic and legality didn't matter. My only defense was going to be facts, paperwork, and sheer stubbornness. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling my lawyer, I said. She gave me a look that clearly said she thought that was a joke. No need for lawyers, she said, voice sharp, almost smug. We will handle this internally. Compliance is non-negotiable. I ignored her, dialing my lawyer's number with trembling hands. The guards shifted uneasily behind her, sensing perhaps that the situation was no longer entirely under their control. The HOA president paced back and forth, ranting about easements, access rights, and community obligations while I explained to my lawyer the exact situation. He listened, silent for a few moments, then said, "This is worse than I thought. We need to act fast. I'll send a notice first thing tomorrow, but you should document everything, every interaction, every threat, every step they take on your property." As I hung up, the president turned to glare at me. "Mr. Johnson," she hissed, "this is far from over. We have ways of enforcing compliance you can't imagine. Prepare for legal action, prepare for fines, prepare for consequences." I swallowed hard. I could feel the tension building like a storm cloud over my cabin. She wasn't bluffing, or if she was the best actress I'd ever seen. I looked at my cabin, the lake shimmering behind it, the trees rustling gently as if mocking the chaos humans create. This was supposed to be my escape, my peace. Instead, it had become a battleground. And that's when I realized something terrifying and exciting at the same time. The real fight for my cabin and my sanity was about to begin. Because if the HOA president thought showing up in stilettos and sunglasses would scare me off, she had another thing coming. I wasn't just standing my ground. I was ready to fight for every inch of my property, and little did she know I had already started planning my next move. After the confrontation with the HOA president, I felt like I'd been hit by a storm. My dream cabin, the peaceful getaway I had imagined for years, had turned into a war zone. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. That's when I went straight to my lawyer. His office smelled like old books and coffee, somewhere between a law library and a man who drinks too much caffeine. I slammed my folder full of deeds, surveys, and screenshots onto his desk. "They're crazy," I said, trying to sound calm but failing. "They've literally tried to kick me off my own property, and they just won't stop." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers like a chess player sizing up his opponent. "Let's see what we've got," he said. I spread everything across the desk. The original deed, the county survey, emails with the HOA president, photos of the guards invading my property. My lawyer's eyes flicked from one document to the next, sharp and calculating. He pulled out a large, dusty county map, unfolded it carefully, and pointed to a faint line that I had almost missed. "This," he said, tapping the line, "is your original boundary. Notice anything?" I squinted. It was faint but clear. The HOA had somehow extended its territory over the years, swallowing up land that didn't belong to them. My cabin was completely outside their claimed jurisdiction. "Wait, you mean they've been lying this whole time?" I asked. "Lying, they've been doing worse than that," he said, leaning closer. "They've been issuing fines, threatening legal action, and harassing owners on property they don't even own." I felt my jaw drop. "You're saying they've been doing this to other people too?" He nodded. "Hundreds of complaints in county records, and now they've picked the wrong person to mess with." We started planning. Step 1, send a legal notice making it crystal clear that any further intrusion would be considered criminal trespassing. Step 2, document everything. Step 3, prepare for the inevitable escalation. As we spoke, my mind raced back to the cabin. Every bolt-cutting guard, every unwarranted threat, every tense confrontation. They'd been operating under the illusion that I wouldn't fight back. But now, thanks to this paperwork, I had the upper hand. I left his office with a sense of determination I hadn't felt in weeks. I returned to my cabin cautiously, scanning the gravel driveway for any signs of intrusion. That's when I noticed it. My gate had been cut again. The locks weren't forced this time, but the chain was clearly tampered with. Footprints led straight toward my porch. My heart sank. They had been here again. I cursed under my breath and took a deep breath, reminding myself that I now had legal ammo on my side. I decided to document everything. Photos, videos, timestamps. I made sure I captured every inch of the property and any sign of intrusion. The more I documented, the more I realized that this wasn't just about my cabin anymore. This was about standing up to an HOA that had been abusing its power for years. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the lake, and I paused for a moment to take it in. My cabin still looked perfect from the outside, untouched by all the chaos inside. I realized then that I couldn't let fear dictate my actions. I went inside, checked the locks, and sat at my kitchen table, spreading out all my documents. I started typing a detailed report to my lawyer, outlining every incident, every threat, and every unauthorized entry. Each word made me feel stronger, like I was slowly reclaiming the property that was mine all along. That night, I lay in bed listening to the lake ripple under the moonlight. Part of me wanted to relax, to believe that the HOA would finally leave me alone. But I knew better. They had already proven they would stop at nothing to assert control. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a fight over land. This was a fight over principle, over peace, over finally being allowed to enjoy the home I had worked so hard for. I closed my eyes and made a promise to myself. I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't giving in. And the HOA was about to learn that some homeowners aren't afraid to fight back. Little did I know, the next day would bring yet another escalation. One that would push the limits of my patience, test my nerve, and set the stage for a showdown I hadn't fully prepared for. I thought I had seen the last of them. I really did. I had my lawyer, my documentation, and the sheriff on speed dial. I even double-checked my locks before going to bed, convinced that this time I had done everything to protect my cabin. But the next morning, as I sipped my coffee and stared at the lake trying to convince myself I was finally safe, I noticed something. Footsteps. Not on the gravel driveway, they were closer, lighter, sneaking up my porch. My heart sank. I froze, straining to hear. Then it hit me. Someone was inside my cabin, my sanctuary. I felt a mix of disbelief and fury. How many times could these people trespass before someone finally stopped them? I grabbed my phone, ready to call the sheriff again, and quietly crept toward the living room. And there they were, 2 guards, caught mid-search, rifling through my drawers like they owned the place. One was taking pictures of my furniture, the other flipping through a small cabinet as if checking for contraband. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me." They froze like deer in headlights. Their confident, arrogant expressions evaporated instantly. "This is my property," I said, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. "You are trespassing, step out now." One of them tried to act casual. "We're just inspecting for possible violations," he said, glancing around nervously. "In my house," I said, incredulous. "I called the sheriff. You have no right to be here." The second guard started moving toward me as if to grab my phone. I stepped back quickly, raising my hands but keeping the phone ready. "Do not touch me," I warned, "or this is going to get much worse for you." By now, the tension had climbed so high it was almost visible. I could feel it in my chest, tight and buzzing like static electricity. My cabin, my dream, my peace, it was all at stake. Then I heard a vehicle pull up outside, not the usual HOA truck, something different. My neighbor's old pickup? No, wait, it was a police deputy responding to a call. I had called the sheriff again before confronting the guards, explaining exactly where they were. Within minutes, a deputy was walking up the gravel driveway, eyes sharp and serious. The guards' faces turned pale. Their confidence had completely disappeared. They realized for the first time that I wasn't alone in this fight. The deputy stepped inside and immediately took in the scene. The open drawers, the camera, the two intruders looking guilty as all get out. He turned to them, voice like thunder. "Step away from the property. Now." The first guard stammered, trying to explain himself. We're just..." "Save it," the deputy cut him off. "You are trespassing. You are violating the law. Step out or you're going to jail." The second guard nodded frantically, moving toward the door like a man who had just realized he was on a sinking ship. I stayed quiet, heart still pounding, as the deputy escorted them out. He looked at me and shook his head. "You did everything right. Keep documenting because this HOA doesn't know how to play fair." Then my phone buzzed, another text from the HOA president. "You think this ends here? Think again. We are coming for you." I stared at the screen, heart still racing, but this time there was a smirk on my face. They thought they could intimidate me. They thought I'd give up my property without a fight. But now they had officially crossed a line. I went around my cabin, checking locks, doors, and windows again. Everything was secure for now. But I knew the next move from the HOA could come at any time, and when it did, I was ready to meet it head-on. Sitting on my porch, looking at the lake shimmering under the morning sun, I realized something. My cabin wasn't just a house anymore. It was a symbol. A symbol of standing up to bullies who think they can control other people's lives. And from that day on, I decided one thing: I would not let this HOA win. Not today, not ever. The battle was far from over, but for the first time I felt a spark of triumph. I had caught them red-handed, involved law enforcement, and taken back a little bit of control. The fight wasn't over, but now I knew I could fight back and win. And I had a feeling the next encounter would be even bigger, even crazier, and even more satisfying. I thought I had seen it all. 2 guards breaking into my cabin, the HOA president showing up like a general ready for war, and enough legal headaches to fill a small library. But nothing could have prepared me for the next morning. I was sipping my coffee on the porch, finally feeling like I could breathe when I heard it, the distant rumble of heavy machinery. At first, I thought great logging trucks until I saw the dust clouds rising along my driveway. My heart sank. A fleet of trucks, bulldozers, and construction equipment was heading straight for my cabin. At the lead was a team of HOA workers, armed with shovels, tape measures, and the audacity of someone who thought rules didn't apply to them. Before I could even yell, one of the workers shouted, "We're building a community trail." A community trail across my property. I nearly choked on my coffee. I ran down the porch waving my arms. "Stop! You have no permits. This is private property." One of them, clipboard in hand, shrugged. "It's approved. The HOA authorized it." I laughed nervously, feeling a mix of disbelief and rage. "Approved? Let me see the permit." They handed me a paper with stamps that looked suspiciously crooked and misspelled. My eyes widened. "This is fake," I said. "Call the county. This isn't valid. You're trespassing." And that's exactly what I did. I dialed the county office, practically shouting over the noise of bulldozers and trucks. Within minutes, an inspector was on her way, and she arrived faster than I could have imagined. The inspector stepped out of her truck, clipboard in hand, and surveyed the scene. Her eyes widened, and then she turned to the crew. "Do you know what you're doing? This is illegal construction on private property. Stop immediately." The HOA workers froze. The bulldozer operator gawked. Even the guards who had been hovering in the background looked like they'd seen a ghost. The inspector walked over to me. "You have all the documents in order." "Everything," I said, handing over deeds, surveys, and my lawyer's letters. She examined everything, then looked at the HOA workers with a fury that could melt steel. "You are not authorized to be here. This work stops immediately. If anyone continues, I will issue citations and fines for trespassing and illegal construction." I felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone with real authority was on my side. But the best part, watching the HOA president's empire crumble in real time. She was on her phone, packing back and forth, trying to call anyone to fix this disaster. Her perfectly polished facade cracked as the inspector shook her head. The guards who had been so confident the day before looked terrified. Then it got even better. The inspector demanded that the HOA produce every permit, survey, and authorization for the work. When they couldn't, the inspector issued immediate citations. She even ordered them to reimburse any costs for false claims and unauthorized work. The HOA president's face turned bright red. She tried to blame the guards, the contractors, the county, anything but herself. But the county inspector wasn't having it. Every excuse crumbled like a house of cards. I stood there, arms crossed, watching them flail. For the first time, I felt a sense of triumph I hadn't dared to hope for. They had tried to intimidate me, to take my property, to push me around, and now their desperation had blown up spectacularly in front of everyone. One of the guards muttered, "We didn't know it was private," and I laughed so hard I nearly fell over. "You didn't know? You've been invading my property for weeks." Neighbors started coming out of their houses, watching the chaos unfold. Whispers and gasps filled the air as people realized the HOA hadn't been following the law. And me? I stood tall, knowing that the fight I had feared for weeks had finally turned in my favor. By the end of the day, the construction had stopped, the HOA workers had left, and the president was nowhere in sight. She had been humiliated, exposed, and backed into a corner she couldn't climb out of. As I walked back to my cabin, the sun reflected on the lake, sparkling like a victory flag. My cabin wasn't just intact, it was untouchable, at least for now. I realized then something important. Sometimes the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And sometimes standing up for yourself isn't just about winning. It's about showing everyone that bullies can be stopped. And little did the HOA know, their empire was crumbling, but the final chapter of this story, the one where I finally get peace on my property, was still to come. Weeks passed since the county inspector shut down the illegal construction, and the HOA was officially in crisis mode. I woke up one morning to an email that felt like a Christmas gift. The HOA president had resigned. Not quietly, of course. She had sent a long, bitter resignation letter blaming everyone but herself. But she was gone. The guards, removed. The contractors, fined. And the county had issued official warnings to the HOA demanding immediate compliance with property laws and boundaries. In other words, they were legally neutered. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I drove up to my cabin, the gravel crunching under my tires like a drumbeat of victory. The lake shimmered in the early morning light, calm and undisturbed. The air smelled of pine, coffee, and freedom. My cabin was finally mine, really mine. Neighbors waved as I walked toward the porch. Some smiled knowingly, others gave subtle nods of respect. I had become, without meaning to, a kind of local legend, the guy who stood up to the HOA and won. And I couldn't help but grin. I stepped onto the porch, taking a deep breath. No guards, no president, no construction crews, just the soft lapping of the lake and the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was surreal. After weeks of chaos, my cabin had returned to the peaceful sanctuary I had dreamed of. I spent the morning checking every lock, every boundary marker, and even the chain on the gate one last time. Everything was secure, official, and untouchable. I had double-checked my deed, confirmed my survey with the county, and made sure my lawyer had copies of everything. Every inch of my property was protected under the law, and finally it felt real. To celebrate, I decided to host a small cookout by the lake. A few neighbors came by, bringing chairs, drinks, and laughter. Even the sheriff stopped in, chuckling about how wild this whole HOA situation had been. "I've seen some odd calls," he said, shaking his head, "but this one takes the cake." We laughed together, sharing stories of the guards, the president, and their increasingly desperate attempts to assert control. I felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond legal victory. This was about reclaiming my life, my peace, and my property. As the sun began to set, I sat back on my porch with a cold drink in hand, watching the lake glow in golden light. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly relaxed. The chaos of the HOA, the trespassing guards, the fake permits, they were all behind me. And the best part? I knew I had the evidence, the law, and the determination to keep it that way. Looking out over the water, I thought about the lessons I had learned. Owning property isn't just about signing deeds or paying taxes. It's about standing up for yourself, documenting everything, and never letting bullies intimidate you. The HOA had tried every trick in the book, but in the end, logic, law, and perseverance won. I smiled as the first stars appeared in the sky, reflecting on the water like tiny diamonds. My cabin was safe, my lake was quiet, and my peace untouchable. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to myself, half laughing. They tried kicking me off land I bought fair and square, but in the end, they kicked themselves out of their own kingdom. The sheriff waved as he left, neighbors waved goodbye, and the lake remained calm, as if approving of the victory. I knew that from now on, whenever I came here, it would be just me, the trees, and the water. No intrusions, no chaos, just the perfect escape I had dreamed of for so long. And in that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought on a battlefield. They're fought on your own property. And when you stand your ground, when you fight smart and with courage, you come out stronger, calmer, and more in control than you ever imagined. Finally, I took a long sip of my drink, leaned back, and let the peace of the cabin sink in. The HOA had tried everything, and they had failed spectacularly. My dream had survived. My cabin was mine, and for the first time in weeks, I truly felt free. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.